we will live to fight again. But for now, we're well and truly fucked.
Will work just fine.
Welcome to HBO's The Sympathizer podcast, where we're debriefing and decoding the new HBO original limited series, The Sympathizer, which is based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel of the same name. I'm Philip Nguyen, a scholar of Vietnamese American culture. And on this podcast, I'll be joined by The Sympathizer's creators, the cast and crew, and of course, author Viet Thanh Nguyen. After every episode, we'll go deeper into the characters, their motives, and how this espionage thriller / cross-cultural satire complicates what we know about the Vietnam War, aka the American War in Vietnam, and its depiction in US pop culture today. Looking at you, Hollywood. Today, we're diving into the very first episode, titled Death Wish. I'm talking with executive producers and co-showrunners Don McKellar and director Park Chan-wook about their approaches to adapting the novel and what to watch out for as the series progresses. Also, their feelings about durian. But first, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't watched episode 1 by now, go. Watch it right now. Stream it exclusively on Max. Then, come back and join us here on the podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's recap some key moments from the first episode.
Ngồi thẳng lên. Bây giờ, bắt đầu lại. Bắt đầu lại là khẩu hiệu của chúng tôi.
Sit straight. Now start again. Starting again is our very motto.
Khởi đầu lại.
Restart,
Hồi tưởng lại.
recollect,
Cải tạo lại.
re-educate,
Cách mạng lại.
revolution,
Và viết lại.
and rewrite. The series opens with the captain in a re-education / prison camp, being ordered to start over, to write another confession, which takes us to Saigon, winter of 1975.
Claude asked me to meet him in front of the cinema. He was a fan of Charles Bronson. Yes, that's right. I know that last time I'd said the movie was Emmanuelle, but she was leaving. The movie was definitely Death Wish.
The captain recalls his role in the capture and interrogation of one of his communist comrades, which, in his undercover role inside the secret police, he is forced to watch in a movie theater with American CIA operative Claude by his side.
I think you'll appreciate this. Not first you won't. You'll lock all this up in a little box, but in the future, when you look in that box again, and you will, it'll remind you that your contribution to this war has been substantial. So keep your eyes glued to the action. Proud of yourself. At least half as proud as I am of you.
The captain spends one last nostalgic night with his blood brothers, Bon and Mung, as the North Vietnamese Army's artillery shells draw closer in on Saigon. For those of you who remember your high school history classes, you may recall that this day is often referred to as the Fall of Saigon. But really, what's in a name? Especially since a war by any other name would smell as sweet as the sweet smell of napalm in the morning. For the Vietnamese, April 30th, 1975 was either about liberation, according to the Vietnamese government, or loss, according to the hundreds of thousands of refugees from Vietnam and Southeast Asia who escaped political persecution en masse by air, land, and sea in waves to destinations unknown in pursuit of freedom. In our story, the general tasked the captain with selecting who will be evacuated on the American plane that Claude has arranged for them. This operation, IRL or in real life, was called Operation Frequent Wind, where well-connected individuals evacuated alongside their former allies. Another campaign, Operation Baby Lift, was marked by early catastrophe as a plane crashed and exploded on the tarmac while evacuating orphaned babies and children split from their families. At the airport, North Vietnamese missiles fall on the tarmac. Bon's wife and child are killed. It's unclear whether Bon and the captain make it out alive. And we're just in episode 1. And now I'm excited to welcome our first guest, executive producer, co-showrunner, and writer, Don McKellar. Don McKellar is a Canadian award-winning actor, director, writer, and playwright. And I'm so happy to talk about The Sympathizer with him today. Don, as we launch into this series, how'd you get involved in this? Why The Sympathizer? Why now? Walk us through that journey.
So I was approached, Neil Fishman, one of our producers, gave me the book, and he'd obtained the rights. He asked me if I'd be interested. At first I thought, I read the book and I loved it, first of all. Then he mentioned Park Chan-wook, the Park Chan-wook connection, because I think Viet, the author of the book, his first choice for a director was Park Chan-wook. He's a big fan. And I'd worked with Park Chan-wook. We'd written a script together a bunch of years ago. And there's the parallel with what Park Chan-wook does, the intelligence and the sort of wittiness and the sort of cruelty at times, but also this sort of expansive compassion.
As a child of Vietnamese refugees myself, born in the United States, growing up with a lot of the pop culture references that are made in the series, and especially thinking about the timeliness of the series. You know, this year will be the 49th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
Yeah.
And next year we're coming on to the 50th. So I think that there are a lot of aspects of the series that kind of speak to what is it that we've learned from Vietnam in an American context, and what is it that still is left to be uncovered.
Yeah, you're right. It's already been the 50th anniversary of American withdrawal. And so this is sort of right now we're in the 50th anniversary process, rethinking of the Vietnam lesson. And yeah, and I think there's certainly this feeling that it's time for a reassessment, time to really process what happened there.
Yeah. And even, I mean, it's taken about 10 years for this project to go from the initial publishing of The Sympathizer and its winning of the Pulitzer Prize to being adapted into a television series, right? Could you speak a little bit about what that adaptation process was like? Like, are there images from the book that you can recall that you remember being, oh, you know, I absolutely want that in the show, or I need to do it?
Well, the book is full of really cinematic moments, for lack of better words. So yeah, when I read it, it was full of stuff that was very visual. There are these big set pieces that I was excited and immediately screamed adaptation to me, like the airport sequence. And each episode is a big event, kind of like the...
Almost like a benchmark.
Yeah, that's right. They all have a big community event. Like, this is where the community is now. They're all sort of theatrical, extravagant moments. So yeah, it was easy to think of things that would be cool on screen. The harder thing was to think of how do we convey the complexity of the book, the intelligence of the book, the sort of wittiness of the book without having just a voiceover quoting all the great lines from the book.
Right. And I think in another way, it's also a slightly controversial book too.
Yes.
Right.
And that's one of the great things about the book is it's a book of ideas, right? Like, it's not afraid of ideas, and even controversial, even contradictory ideas. It's about discourse and this idea that the stories are told from many sides. And I think the lesson of the book is that we all have two faces, that these stories all contain these internal contradictions that we can't avoid. And that's part of life. And you may feel you have your side, but you also have the other side inside you. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's sort of liberating, but it also demands a pretty good script.
Right. Especially, I mean, you say the word liberating, right? And I think in this context, I feel, me as a Vietnamese American, having seen the series, I feel liberated by it, right? I think as I think to maybe my parents' generation or the elder generation, that word liberation is very charged.
Yeah.
Especially as it refers to that particular day, April 30th, 1975.
Of course. It's a loaded day, right? And everyone takes their sides, whether it's a day of infamy or a day of liberation. So, yeah. And obviously just a lot of people, when they see we have this communist protagonist telling the story right from the beginning, are going to get their hackles up. They're
Right.
gonna, like, why? Finally, they tell a Vietnamese story and they have a communist protagonist.
Right. They're up in arms. They're
Yeah,
ready.
but for those people, I just hope, first of all, that they watch the entire series.
Especially since I don't think a lot of them have read the book either.
Yeah, maybe. But Viet is fearless. He's sort of not afraid to offend anyone. And I think we offend everyone in a way with this series. I hope people see that the book is about those contradictions. And the character is nothing if not flawed, the central character. And it is told by that character under duress. So the novel protects itself in many ways by its sort of postmodern conceits. But it also acknowledges that sort of sophistication is also the central character's fatal flaw. Do you know what I mean? He's
Right.
almost too smart for his own good, which is quite revealing of Viet to say, because he's so smart and so fast. But he also the book is saying, but ultimately it comes down to, I don't want to give away the ending. Of the
Right,
book.
right. And I'm thinking about how even his own memoir
Yeah.
is named A Man of Two Faces.
Exactly.
Right.
He's saying, but I'm there's two sides. I see the other side. He's always saying, ultimately, I see the other side, and that's really the lesson of the series, I hope.
Right. To see both the human and the inhuman, as he
Yeah.
says, and not to see things as just in a binary way, in this either or, but as both and.
That's right. Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely right. That's the lesson, I think, that for when you ask why it's relevant, and when we talk about the polarized world right now, it's trying to say, see yourself from the other side. It's trying to say to Americans, put yourself in the Vietnamese side, which is something that they haven't
Really.
traditionally
Yeah.
done, and then see that
Not too
side,
comfortable.
and then see that side also has two sides,
Right.
and that those sort of divisions go on forever, because that's what history has left us with. We're fractured, and then if you allow yourself that sort of leap, then it demands this kind of empathy in return, and this kind of humility, and that's, I think, ultimately where the book lands.
Mm. You talked a little bit about this collaboration with director Park Chan-wook.
Yeah.
Iconic, internationally iconic and renowned. You mentioned he was one of its first choices to direct the series. I mean, what was that like?
Well,
Did you ever find yourself like, just even talking about him, I'm like, I'm in fanboy mode now.
Well, like I say, I'd worked with him before, and so when we first met, I remember talking to him and saying, Director Park this, Director Park that, because everyone calls him Director Park. And then he sort of laughed one day and said, you don't have to call me Director Park. My name's Chan-wook, and we're equal. But still, I often call him Director Park because it just feels right somehow. There is something intimidating about him. I don't deny that. He has this sort of mastery, and sort of his actions and his decisions are definitive. But at the same time, he's very kind and open. And he actually is very open to ideas. I always know that I've come up with a good idea when he comes back. If he likes my idea, he'll say, I like it, but it should be like this. He always takes it one step more, which is always a great moment for me. Like, he always pushes it farther.
Right. So our listeners, the listeners of the Companion podcast, at this point in time, they would have watched episode 1, an introduction to the Sympathizer series. I want to ask you this question, Director Don, about,
You don't have to call me director. Please.
Yeah.
We're equals.
Thank you. I'll remember that when we talk to Director Park. But, as we start the series, right, what was it like to, think about like where you start and how you introduce each of our characters, right? Because we're introduced to them and we are with them along their journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for some of our earliest discussions, Director Park and myself, were about, first of all, the narrative device of the film. Because, as you know, the novel is told first person, and the story is told in flashback, and we learn that he's it's being told in a re-education camp. I can say that because we reveal that right off the top.
Yes.
And the book, it's told under duress. That was one of the things we wanted to say right from the beginning, because that seemed very fresh. And of course, stories told under duress, stories told by people who have had their confessions tortured out of them are not reliable. Just by nature, they wouldn't be allowed in court, right? So that right from the beginning, we're saying this. Be wary of what this guy's telling you.
Right.
He's telling it from one side. He's beyond unreliable narrator. He's a narrator who can't tell the truth.
Right. And so we're raising all of the yellow and red flags
Yeah,
right now.
exactly. Right, exactly. And that was something we wanted to do right from the beginning. So we did that. And then we thought, let's start with the communist spy. The reasons why we start there will become more clear as the series continues. But we wanted to raise the question in the viewer's mind, why does the Commandant want him to start with that incident? What is it about the incident in the cinema that is important for the Commandant? So once we decided on that, which is a moment which raises these sort of moral and ethical questions for the captain that sort of set the groundwork for the entire series, then that allowed us to build out. And of course, we had to end at the evacuation, at the fall of Saigon, as the book does to us. Sort of the most memorable, moment in the book, and also probably the moment that maybe historically people have in their head. If they know anything about Vietnam, they probably know those images of April 30th of the helicopters and the evacuating people and things.
Yeah, and this very cinematic moment.
Yeah,
I will say there's a lot of prickliness
Of
that
course.
you're working through, right?
of course.
But like a durian, beneath that prickliness is a very, like, it's a beautiful custard with a not so beautiful scent, and it becomes a way to advance the narrative for the first episode.
That's awesome.
To say the least. So with my final question for you, could you share your thoughts on durians? Were those real durians on set? Which supermarket did you go to get them?
Yeah, people, it's funny. Okay, so you recall, viewers, that the general tells the character identified in the book as the crapulent major not to eat durians in the interrogation process. And the durians are going to reoccur in this series. They are a kind of symbol, the prickly and foul-smelling fruit, but tasty fruit.
Tasty.
I like them. I don't know. Do you like?
Of course.
Do you?
They're a delicacy.
It's not
yeah.
a given. It's not.
No,
a lot
yeah.
of people
Especially
don't.
when they're frozen. I
Yeah,
will
oh
say.
yeah, like that's the sort of easy way to eat them. I
Right.
think if you want to try it for the first time, I would say the frozen version.
Yeah, it
is,
helps with the smell if you're not used to it. Yeah.
It contains the smell of it. Yeah, and you're right. There's a prickly element to this series. I mean, I think that it's not a metaphor I've ever thought of, but I do hope that if people find those prickly aspects off-putting, or they have a smell associated with some incident in the story, maybe because of their history or their family history, that they allow themselves to taste the fruit. You know, when it comes to April 30th, of course, we knew it was a significant day. I mean, we had, of course, Vietnamese writers in the room, but also our cast members. Almost everyone had a story, a connection with that day. And, everyone had a different take on it, but it's a loaded day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, hopefully, by the end of the first series, you think, whatever my associations are with that history, I'm able to be moved and feel empathy for the humanity of these people and what they endured. Even though this guy is telling me it is this communist who pretends not to feel that, I hope people allow themselves to step back and see the bigger picture.
And to give it a chance.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Director Don.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now, y'all, I have got to hold back my fanboy self a little. because we're going to be talking with executive producer, co-showrunner, and writer, director Park Chan-wook. For those who don't know, Park Chan-wook is a renowned South Korean screenwriter, producer, and filmmaker, known for bold, colorful cinematography, black humor, and dark subject matter in his films, which include Old Boy, The Handmaiden, and Decision to Leave. In addition to his roles on The Sympathizer as executive producer and co-showrunner with Don McKellar, Park Chan-wook directed the first 3 episodes of the series, and I am so thrilled to speak with him today, along with our interpreter, Jae-hoon Chung. Director Park, my first question for you, for this first episode of the series, which we all have just watched, I want to ask you, what was it about the story that resonated with you? And could you share with our listeners how you were introduced to the novel in the first place? And were there any moments from that novel that inspired you to take the helm as a director of the series?
우선 리브 피시맨이라는 우리 프로듀서 중에 한 명이
So one of the
원래
producers on
제가
our
몇 년 전부터
project
알던
is Liv
사이였어요.
Fishman,
네.
and I've known him for many years even before
연락을
this
해왔어요.
Sympathizer.
그래서
And he called me out of the blue,
소설을 가지고
and he
TV
told
쇼를
me
만들고
that
싶다.
there's a original
거에
novel
달라.
that we want to
근데
adapt
마침
into a
한국에
TV
번역이
show.
되어 있더라고요.
So he told me,
그래서
can you
재빨리
actually
사서
read the
읽고
original
읽자마자
novel and think about it?
이것은
So
하고
I
싶다.
went to the
정말
bookstore,
망설임
and
없이
fortunately, it was already translated into Korean
그렇게
language.
된 이유는
So I bought the book and I read it. And as soon as I read it, I made a decision that I would like to be involved in this project.
유사한
And also, not only
상황들이
that, as a
많았고
Korean, there are
우리
a whole lot of
한국인의
similarities
그리고
between us and what the
좀더
Vietnamese
넓게
went through.
보면
Not
아시아의
only the Korean
역사,
history,
그리고
but in terms of wider
동양과
spectrum,
서양의
in terms of the
관계,
Asian history, and also the story revolves around
사회주의와
the East and West, the relationship, and the ideology
이런 여러
conflict
가지
between the socialist and the
차원에서
capitalism. So all that is to say,
사람인
as a
저로서
Korean, it didn't feel like this
남의
is
얘기처럼
someone
들리지
else's
않는
story. It felt like
그런
I
면을
resonated with it very much. So I made a decision right away to
결심을
participate in this project.
I want to ask you about something that the author Philip Nguyen had said, Director Park. What he calls the quote unquote propaganda of pop culture. And for you in the director and co-showrunner role, as you were adapting the series, could you share a little bit of your thoughts about how the series either is a part of that propaganda of pop culture or speaks against it, right? Especially thinking about the sort of political motivations that are in the novel and how the series I anticipate will be very, very mainstream.
그동안 팝컬처, 미국에서의 팝컬처에서
I would like to define that while our show is a study about the propaganda features within the American pop culture,
한계에서 벗어나고
it also went beyond that, and it approached about the propaganda in a meta sense. We also attempted to not leave a trace that was about defending one side or the other.
무슨 주장을 하려는 그런 흔적이 조금이라도 남아있지 않도록 노력을 했습니다.
The story is talking about how an individual or group that has fell into a trap of dogma or ideology actually can fall apart from their original intention and commit such cruel act. And in doing so, how it might leave out lives of individuals.
그 개인의 삶을 하나하나
We try to look carefully of every single one of them and portray them with care.
그 프로파간다 성격, 팝컬처의 프로파간다 성격에 대한 코멘트는
In terms of commenting about the propaganda, our 4th episode is actually centered around that idea. The episode portrays satirically and critically about the tour who is played by Robert Downey Jr., who is actually making a movie about the Vietnam War. Which is not to say we are criticizing about such ideology, whether one is bad or if all the ideologies are bad. That is actually why we end the series with the line that says, despite everything, I hope for the revolution.
라는 이야기를 그런 대사를 함으로써 표현하고자 했습니다.
I want to ask about what drew you to using flashbacks and flash forwards as a way to frame the captain's experience, as well as to draw parallels between life in Vietnam and life in the U.S., especially as we see the ways in which he develops as a character, right? As well as, kind of in a more introspective way, the significance around using these bilingual voiceovers that we're introduced to the series with as a way to get into his head as he's re-narrating or rewriting his story.
예, 이 소설 자체가 re-education 캠프.
So the thing is, the framework had been originally set in this original novel because this takes place in re-education camp as the captain writes his confession. And of course, we can go about changing this framework, but I thought this confession as a frame was actually a strong suit in this novel. And by doing so, many times when you're translating literature work into a visual medium, then you have to abandon what goes on in the protagonist's head. But because we can use, by embracing this confession framework, not only can I use the confession, but also I can use the captain and his conversation with the commandant, sort of like a Q&A, so that I was able to use that many times, and I was able to use that to make a moment out of it by using those moments as a flashback gateway. And not only that, we went about using drawing from Viet's very excellent prose. We were able to borrow his writing and also use some of his dialogues, but also on top of that, Don and I came up with new lines as well. We tried hard to avoid making a voiceover that is too explanatory or too on the nose, but at the same time, we were very conscious about making voiceover so it will make you laugh or make you sad, and use this voiceover and embrace it as a device in terms of the filmmaking. So we went about using this voiceover so we can go to the past or move forward to the future in a free way. And we also went about being playful about using the transitions, not only visually, but also auditorily. And we thought about how to use right timing in terms of editorial. And I strived hard to make how to go about using the flashback in multi-dimensional way. By doing that, I actually embraced how it interrupts in the storytelling and how we can go to the past or present or the future as much as we want and anytime we want in terms of the editing of the episode. So I actually use this device as a filmmaking or TV edit device. In other words, it wasn't about fooling the audience, presenting the story as a real story, but I went about making it so they already know that this is a made-up story. For example, the story progresses and the voice interrupts and the voice says, "Wait a minute, you said something else the last time." And then the image freezes, and then we rewind, and then when it picks up again, we introduce totally new information. That's sort of the format we went about achieving.
그리고 그 보이스오버들이 더욱 흥미로워지는
And
이유는
actually, the reason why the voiceover is so interesting is because the captain uses dual language. So we have the captain, whenever he's thinking by himself, is spoken or he's thinking in English. And there's a very deep meaning behind this. Because in fact, when he's writing the confession, the text itself is written in Vietnamese. So when he's writing the confession, he's writing in Vietnamese, but when he's thinking, he's speaking or he's thinking in English. So I won't go any further than that because it might be a spoiler. But this is intentional device that we used in order to portray the duality of the captain, his essence. So, yes, and at the same time, when we have the conversation between him and the commandant, the questions and the conversations, those are all happening in Vietnamese. So, for the viewers, really paying attention to when the English is spoken and when we switch to Vietnamese, that's something you should keep your eyes on to understand the meaning behind this series as well.
예전에 만들어졌던 그리고 가끔 지금도
So think about it, for example, for American dramas or film, there are many work where they are foreigners or non-Americans, but they speak in English. For example, we have Nazi officers speaking in English, and even though they're speaking amongst themselves, the thing is they speak in British accent, which is so silly, and it has been accepted for so many years. So the sympathizer, if you look at it, the viewers will be pondering and it will give them a chance to think about, challenge this mannerism that had been happening for so many decades.
Dr. Park, I'm sure you get this often, but that is brilliant. It makes so much sense, especially for folks that may understand both English and Vietnamese. Thank you, Director Park, for giving us some of that insight. I want to ask you about Robert Downey Jr. playing multiple roles, right? In the first episode, we're introduced to Claude, and later we'll be introduced, I don't want to give too much away, but to the professor, the congressman, and the auteur. Would you be able to tell us about how you came up with this idea for Robert Downey Jr. to play all of the sort of white patriarch characters and how that metatextuality or symbolism kind of comes out throughout the series?
각본을 작업할 때
So when I went about writing this show, all of the characters, or each of the characters that Robert ended up playing, they were very important on their own terms. At the same time, I obviously wanted to bring life into them, and I wanted to portray the characters extremely well. But the thing was, the running time, or I should say the screen time for each of the character was very limited. And while I wanted a great actor to portray these characters, because they were so short in terms of the screen time, I worried that no one would be able or no one would be willing to take the job. So I went about dissecting the differences and the common things they shared amongst the characters. And even though their jobs may be different, and even though each and every one of them might have different characters, at the same time, I learned that they were representation of America's imperialism or American ideology. So they were just sharing one body with many different faces. So in essence, they were all in a same one individual. So my next step was how to go about portraying this idea effectively and accurately to our viewers. So my thinking was it shouldn't be that the critics watch this many, many times and figure this out. My hope was that viewers will watch it and immediately they would understand the idea that I was going for, which led to this one single individual actor playing these various characters. But that also led me to think about setting this limit, imposing limits, so we wouldn't be going about using too much of prosthetics or VFX, so that each of the characters will be drastically different, so that the audience would understand and right away know that they are one and in the same actor played by one individual. And it required great skill, great acting ability in order to portray this without going over the limit, which required a great, superb craft in its skill.
I want to ask about one thing that you mentioned in an interview with the Academy about your film, Decision to Leave, which employs this sort of contemporary communication technology. You had mentioned that you wanted to use a fountain pen instead. And a fountain pen is what our captain uses for spycraft in this series. Is that intentional? Is there some continuity there in the broader scope of your work? And before we get into the language aspect of the series too, right? The role of writing as a part of this metatextual narrative.
예, 필기구는 만년필로 종이에 쓴다는 것이
So in
가장
terms of writing device,
우아하고
writing
아름다운
with the fountain pen
행위죠.
on the paper,
소리로나
I
모양으로
feel like that is the most
잉크
elegant
색깔
and
같은
beautiful
걸 생각해보면
action in terms of sound and in terms of the appearance, and also in terms of the color of the ink. It's a very great device to use to capture in film. For Decision to Leave, I couldn't really afford to do that because it is set in 2020. Modern year. However, in terms of the Sympathizer, yes, it was based in 1970s, so we could have afford to do that, but we weren't really able to freely explore it because even though there are a whole lot of writings happening at the re-education camp, they can't, I don't think they would allow them to write in fountain pen because it's quite expensive and it could be a weapon. And I thought about maybe perhaps pencil, but if they were to write so many pages of confessions, then that will require knife in order to sharpen the pencil. Then that would become a weapon as well. So unfortunately, we had to resort to using very uninteresting ballpoint pen.
글쓰기 자체에 관한 이야기다. 이 쇼 전체가. 그렇게 말할 수도 있어요.
So I dare say the show is actually about the writing, because obviously it's about him writing the confession in terms of the format of the show.
아주 첫 에피소드의 첫 대사 중에 rewrite이라는 단어가
And
있는
in
것만
the
봐도
very
알 수 있듯이.
first episode, and within the first line, he mentions the rewrite. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but also at the end of the episode, there's a mention of rewrite again. So just like how we open the show and how we close the show, I think it implies that writing is very important in the show. I think writing, the acting of the writing is very meaningful in that is an individual reflecting about his life, his identity, his misdeeds, his sin, is something the act who goes about reflecting upon his life, who actually goes about writing these things.
벌어진 사건에 대한 생략.
And it's not only about whatever incident that had happened, it's more about what had been omitted, why such incident had been omitted, or actually how he was switched the order of the story and the format. That actually has much more meaning as well.
문장이 어떤 순서로 배치됐고 문장 중에
So
있어야
it's
될
not
것이
only
뭐가
about
빠졌느냐.
what is
라는
written
이
in
형식
each and
자체에
individual
사실상
sentence,
제일
but
큰
it's
의미가 담겨
also
있다는
about the structure
그런
of the
의미에서
sentence and what is omitted in the sentence. So having said that, I believe the Sympathizer show reflects how important the act of writing is.
Thank you, Director Park. As I sit here writing notes with my fountain pen to evoke that sense of what it means to listen and to commit to memory the stories that I'm hearing, right? And as a way to sort of connect to the past, I think. As you've demonstrated, you're a master time traveler yourself. Director Park, I just want to thank you for the time, and I'm so honored. Appreciate you and your work. My last question is, for the first episode, were the durians on set CGI, or did you have to deal with the smell?
그 두리안은 그 소품으로 만들어진 것이었기 때문에
So actually,
CGI는
that
아니지만
was not CGI,
만들어진
that was props,
소품이라서
and
실제
it didn't smell.
냄새가
But even
나지
if it
않았어요.
was a
그리고
real
뭐
thing,
낫다고
I
해도
wouldn't
나는
be
그렇게
disgusted by the
역겨워하지
smell,
않습니다.
to be honest with you.
And I hope in that spirit, everyone listening to this podcast and watching the series continues to watch the series and understands all of the delicious custard that lays under the prickly outside of the durian. Thank you so much, Director Park, for joining us on the official Sympathizer Companion podcast. And congratulations.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow. And that's a wrap on episode 1 of the Sympathizer podcast. Many thanks to showrunner Don McKellar and director Park Chan-wook for joining us today. We'll see you all next time when we'll dive into episode 2 with actor Hwa Sun-dae, who plays the captain, executive producer from Team Downey, Amanda Burrell, and the Sympathizer author himself, Philip Nguyen. In the meantime, stream new episodes of the HBO original limited series, The Sympathizer, Sundays, exclusively on Max. And subscribe and listen to the podcast after every episode of the show on Max or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to enjoy that durian, smell and taste all together. The Sympathizer podcast is produced by the Mashup Americans for HBO.